The
General Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland. I request protocol to escort him to the podium. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations Mr. Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland, and I now invite him to address the General Assembly.
Distinguished Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellency, distinguished Mr. President, Excellencies, esteemed heads of states and nations, esteemed delegates. I congratulate His Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, on his election to the honorable function of the President of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. I would like to express Poland's full support for his mission and wish every success in its execution. I also want to thank His Excellency, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, for his active presidency over the works of the General Assembly in the previous session. Furthermore, I am grateful to Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for developing the report entitled Our Common Agenda, which provides a comprehensive response to the most pressing challenges faced by the world today. Just like Mr. Secretary General, I can see the need for international solidarity in the COVID-19 vaccination process. Just like him, I can see the need for action on the climate crisis and the protection of biodiversity. As participants of numerous debates, I can also see an increasing consciousness of mainly young people who realize that the decisions taken today will have an immense impact on our lives. And this trend, that young people understand this fact, is something that delights me. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I am standing before you as a leader of a 38 million strong nation who, just like all our states, has been facing up to an unprecedented pandemic and all of its consequences for almost 2 years now. Over the period of 20 months, we have lost 75,000 lives, while almost 3 out of 38 million people in our country have contracted the virus. Although our robust economy bravely resisted the crisis and has managed to come back to an exceptionally dynamic growth today, during the first year of the pandemic, it failed for the first time in 30 years to record such a growth. I do not need to explain to you, the leaders of states, what it means for millions of families, since you know the situation firsthand. I am standing before you as one of more than 200 million people who have recovered from COVID-19. Those who contracted the virus and managed to recover from it. Like surely many of you present here, I went through this illness which befalls people irrespective of their function, status, religion, convictions, orientation, and worldviews. The past 20 months of fight against the pandemic reminded us of a word which we Poles know since the cradle. That word is solidarity. Many of you know what I'm talking about. This name refers in our history to a large independent trade union established in 1980 by workers in the plants who went on strike against the communist regime and who in the 1980s and 1990s inspired millions of people across the globe in their fight for their democratic or labor rights. This word has become to be a symbolic guiding principle of our policy, its ideal. Speaking about solidarity, I'm also thinking about solidarity in the context of COVID-19. And this reflection is by no means an easy one, especially in reference to us, the leaders of the rich world, or as some call it, of the affluent North. Did we show enough solidarity? Did the mankind behave in the right manner throughout its fight against the virus? Did we offer help to each other as we should be doing according to our basic moral instinct as humans? Well, one can have serious doubts about it. Did we, the rich North, since my country, despite all its daily problems, belongs to the limited group of affluent states, demonstrate the necessary solidarity with the countries of the South? Did we have an equal access to vaccines and other measures preventing the spread of the disease? When the threat came, it was our first instinct to isolate ourselves from each other. Borders re-emerged in Europe. Those were unquestionably justified actions, as none of us knew back then how serious the danger would really be. The situation was further exacerbated by the reports about tens of thousands of those infected and deceased. Every one of us remembers the horror of the first months of 2020. Also, the huge hopes we attached to the development of a vaccine which would protect us from the disease. However, it is today, almost 2 years on, with over 4.5 million casualties, that we should answer the question how well we passed the solidarity test. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed leaders, esteemed delegates, I salute those who won the vaccine battle in laboratories and those who, risking their own health and lives, vaccinated hundreds of millions of the cohabitants of our planet. But was the access to vaccines fair? Did we not forget that in a pandemic, a vaccine is more of a human right than a commodity regulated by market principles? I wanted Poland to be, right from the start, a country of solidarity, a country not guided by the rule the weaker has to die. Therefore, we tried to protect each and every life with the same commitment. Therefore, whenever we could, we tried to show solidarity with other nations who needed assistance at a given time. I'm not able to say whether we did everything possible, but still we tried, for instance, by sending our medical doctors to our friends in Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, as well as the United States, or in Italy, which suffered in Europe. I am convinced that some of the countries of the rich North behaved in the same way as Poland. Poland, who donated 6 million doses of vaccines to inter alia, our partners from the South. But was that enough to close the obvious gap in the access to vaccines, which got wasted in some states and were inaccessible in others? It seems to me that our part of humanity still should have many reasons to be dissatisfied with itself. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable delegates, the word solidarity does not refer exclusively to the pandemic, whereas the pandemic did not make other global problems disappear. We are discussing the rights of nations in this forum. Let me ask you then, what is the first right of every nation? It is the right to self-determination and the right to democratic governance set out in detail in the Science of Democratization and enshrined in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights adopted by the UN. I am absolutely sure that most of us agree on the fact that each of our nations, the United Nations, has the right to protect its borders, the right to their inviolability, to choose its system of government, and to govern with the consent of the nation and never against it. Ladies and gentlemen, do we really agree with that? Since I have an impression, and it is not only my impression, that COVID-19 allowed us to easily forget about multiple misfortunes plaguing different parts of our globe, often in the vicinity of our homes. During the pandemic, reports of the tragedy in Syria, where an externally supported civil war has inflicted unimaginable suffering on the population and turned millions of people into refugees and fugitives, vanished from the headlines. The tragedy in Libya, Ethiopia, and Yemen is barely noticed by many people from the rich North. During COVID-19, we did not move any closer to resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which, as all of us know, should be a two-state solution, but first of all, a peaceful one. Unfortunately, tragic developments are unfolding also close to the Polish border, and I have the impression that humanity seems to have forgotten about them. Furthermore, the pandemic has not stopped the war in Ukraine, where over 13,000 people died since the beginning of the Russian aggression, with one state seizing the territory of another. In Europe, after the Second World War, in the 21st century, Ukraine was attacked. And what was the reaction of the rich North to the drama of the Ukrainian nation fighting for its independence, for its self-determination? The response was the construction of a large Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which will carry Russian gas to Western Europe, bringing further billions in revenue to the aggressor, and complete helplessness or even indifference to the fact that from that moment on, Ukraine finds itself in an even bigger danger. Recently, I have attended the Crimea Platform Summit in Kiev. Being one of few leaders representing the rich North, I searched with my eyes for those who have constructed and approved the construction of Nord Stream 2. I did not find them. COVID-19 also obscures to many people the events in neighboring Belarus, neighboring to Poland, where since August 2020, hundreds of thousands of people have come out daily for peaceful protests, demanding just one thing: respect for the election result. In response, they encountered police beatings, tear gas, and oftentimes bullets used by the regime to defend itself against its own people. As I speak, more than 650 persons are imprisoned in Belarus, the majority of them young women and men, patriots, who simply wanted to choose their leader in fair elections. They are suffering in prison due to political reasons. Recently, a kangaroo court has sentenced two of them, Maria Kolesnikova and Maxim Znak, to 10 and 11 years in prison. Along with them, the leaders of the Polish minority in Belarus are either detained or imprisoned for their democratic activity: Angelika Borys and Andrzej Duda. These are just a few names from among hundreds of those persecuted. We demand the release of all of them and expect greater solidarity from the international community with the nation of Belarus, who simply wants to have a fair state, to have a fair democracy. What have these people done that was so wrong? Nothing. They wanted to claim the same right to elect their government that the French, the Poles, the Americans, the Koreans, the Australians, or the people of Argentina have, or of those of the United States. They wanted the free elections in which many of us ran, the presidents of the free world, and the importance of which the UN General Assembly so emphatically expressed in a series of historic resolutions, enhancing the effectiveness of the principle of periodic and genuine elections. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, they paved the way for the realization that the right to form one's own government is not some Western whim, but a universal human right. The Belarusians, the society of that country, wants to be able to make their authorities respect this universal right. And they pay for this with their suffering. They pay for this with prison. I'm saying all of this as a leader of a country where almost 150,000 Belarusians have found shelter and employment, including thousands of protesters. I have recently told our Belarusian brothers that they are welcome here and that Poland will be their home for as long as they deem it appropriate and necessary. And I wish to uphold these words very decisively. But solidarity comes at a price, because regimes defend themselves not only against their own citizens, but also against democratic states. The response of the authoritarian regime in Belarus has taken the shape of an unprecedented hybrid attack on the borders of Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, the three countries on the eastern flank of NATO and the European Union. For many weeks, The regime of Alexander Lukashenko has been bringing tens of thousands of desperate inhabitants of the Middle East into its country, forcing them under police batons to cross our borders in an attempt to create an artificial humanitarian crisis. These people then camp out at the border, and the regime is deaf to our offers to provide them with humanitarian aid. These people, the immigrants, are treated by the regime as pawns in a political game, and their dignity and fundamental rights are offended. In this crisis, we will not succumb. We will not succumb because, on our part, there is no agreement to instrumental treatment of migrants, no agreement to the abuse of their vulnerable situation pitched against the security of our borders. The borders which we protect, as it is our duty, also being a member of the EU, who defends the border of the European community. I'm saying this also as a leader of a country that knows very well how to tell the difference between a humanitarian crisis and hybrid activities. The country which, together with its allies, participated in the refugee rescue operation in Kabul airport just a few weeks ago. Initially, our intention was to evacuate dozens of military and diplomatic staff who cooperated with us. We ended up evacuating over 1,300 people. We helped other countries to exfil their own people, but we also benefited from the solidarity shown by others, particularly by the Republic of Uzbekistan, and we are deeply grateful for that. I'm saying this to remind you once again that the world did not come to a standstill during the pandemic. The pandemic has not deprived nations of their democratic aspirations, nor has it stifled people's desire to live in freedom, nor has it suppressed the craving for dignity and respect across large swathes of the globe. I recently saw myself the enthusiasm among the Moldavian voters who took power away from the oligarchs plundering the country and voted in favor of reforms, democracy, normality, and honesty. I assured them of Poland's support for any initiative of the kind in our region, wherever we have influence. Because these are moments that restore faith in the most fundamental values of humanity and inspire the spirit of profound solidarity in other countries, my own included. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed delegates, dear friends, trivial as it may sound, we all realize that mankind is not homogeneous, and each of us has his or her own world of values, beliefs, and things that are sacrosanct to us. But the experience of sharing the same planet and the knowledge that we have no other teach us coexistence and prompt us to define the framework thereof. International law is such a framework. It is one of the greatest achievements of modern times. We can debate at length about reforming the UN system, but each of such debates comes down to one thing: how to promote the United Nations' role in securing the primacy of international law, because we want to live in a world founded on law, not on force. Securing respect for international law was one of Poland's priorities as a member of the Security Council in 2018-2019. Today, we continue in the same vein in support of international law by serving in the Human Rights Council. Our priority is to protect vulnerable groups, civilians in armed conflicts, or religious minorities. The same purpose will be pursued by the Polish chairpersonship in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in 2022, where we want to work for the resolution of regional and frozen conflicts. We want to tap OSCE potential to improve the conditions of the weakest and most vulnerable people. We will also strive to make human rights the main point of reference for OSCE activities, perceiving that solidarity is the fundamental value underlying human rights, the rights enjoyed by every human being. Dear delegates, esteemed fellow leaders of the world, the pandemic has nearly removed from the headlines another major topic: the fight against climate change, the fight for a secure future for all of us and for our children. and also for our grandchildren. We, the leaders, must realize what it takes to protect people and the planet from climate change. This problem will not disappear together with the pandemic. It is also part of international solidarity. It has to be this part. Let me pose this question once again. Do we, the rich North, pass the test of solidarity, or do we merely cater to our own statistics by relocating production to the poorer countries of the South, where least environment-friendly technologies are applied, and then those countries are blamed for contaminating the planet? I'm saying this as a leader of a country that overthrew the communist dictatorship in 1989 and inherited a very difficult ecological situation in the aftermath. Over the last 30 years, we have made tremendous progress on that count. Between 1988 and 2016, Poland reduced its carbon dioxide emissions by more than 30%. Our rivers and air have become cleaner, and the country much greener. Moreover, we have more forests. By the way, Poland, being a country of primeval forests, woods, Great Lakes and rivers, attracts many lovers of nature from all over Europe. Of course, I could also add that the share of hard coal in our energy mix is systematically decreasing, with biofuels and renewable energy sources gaining ground. But at this point, let me humbly admit that this is only the beginning of the road to us, a long road which is ahead of us. Nevertheless, I believe we can make it, we will manage, because we are very ambitious in this regard and we understand the challenges of the future. Indeed, during our presidency of COP24, we managed to finalize negotiations of the Katowice Rulebook, an agreement that streamlines the implementation of the Paris Agreement so as to make it transparent and fair to all parties. It is also fair to say that we supported the transformation of our energy sector with due respect to the socio-economic context. But at the same time, we realize that more effort will be needed. Therefore, in February this year, the Polish government gave a seal of approval to the energy policy of Poland until 2040, which maps out the directions of energy transformation. The document is an important step towards low and zero-emission transition in the Polish economy. It is my firm belief that in the name of solidarity, the strategy will be further implemented by the government of my successor in office. What is important, I do believe that the fundamental principle will be maintained, the principle of just transition, of such transition which takes into account social needs, transition which takes into account possibilities, and such which takes into account the need for a man to live in dignified conditions, to have a job, and to be able to raise his or her children in dignity, which also takes into account the interests of the family. Honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen, solidarity has not ceased to exist in the face of a pandemic. It should continue to be our motto and our central tenet, together with others, not to compromise on human rights and the rights of entire nations, to secure the development of the UN, always in due respect of the primacy of international law, and to be ready to set and pursue ambitious goals in the struggle for our planet. In the last 20 months, when the pandemic weighed so heavily on us, we have often asked ourselves, what will be the post-pandemic world? Will it be the world of solidarity? Or shall we resume business as usual and consider that these months have been nothing more than an interruption in our routine, after which we can go on repeating our old mistakes? Yes, we can say that safely. Personally, I believe that mankind shares the same aspirations: security and prosperity, democracy and human rights. A world without wars and violations of borders, nations respecting each other's territories, languages, and identities, a world without discrimination, without offense of inherent dignity of human beings, a world that consistently endorses, among others, the principles invoked by the authors of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a world based on solidarity among people and among states. I believe that Poland will be striving for such a world, no matter who holds the office of its president, whether the next president is a man or a woman. I do believe that this is going to be the striving of our next leader. Thank you for your attention.
I want to thank His Excellency Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland, for his statement, and I would like to ask protocol to escort His Excellency.